At the age of 70, looking back on the 5 decades behind him, John Travolta is no longer the young man whose Saturday Night Fever dance moves captivated the world, nor the commanding Vincent Vega of Pulp Fiction. He is a man who has endured some of the most devastating trials fate can inflict upon a human being. John Travolta stands as a living paradox of Hollywood. On one hand, he possesses an estimated fortune of around 250 million USD and a legendary career that helped shape global popular culture. On the other hand, behind the luxurious velvet curtains, he is a man who has stood beside the hospital beds of 3 of the people he loved most: his first great love, his eldest son, and the wife who shared nearly 3 decades of his life, only to bid each of them farewell in profound solitude. At 70, John's philosophy of life no longer revolves around awards or multi-million-dollar contracts. After enduring so many layers of loss, he has come to understand that sometimes simply surviving and continuing to move forward each day is the greatest and most difficult performance a person can ever give. Travolta's true brilliance no longer lies beneath stage lights, but in the strength of a heart that has been shattered countless times and still chooses to beat with hope. Today, let us step into the hidden corners of this solitary giant's life and discover that behind every dazzling dance, there has always been a quiet sorrow that never truly faded away. John Travolta was born in 1954 in Inglewood, New Jersey, the youngest of 6 children. If you saw John during the 1970s, carrying himself with absolute confidence, it would be difficult to imagine the reality of his early life in cramped rooms where financial hardship was part of everyday existence. His father was a weary tire salesman, constantly struggling to provide for a large family. Yet the person who truly shaped John's destiny was his mother, Helen Travolta, a drama teacher who carried within her an unfulfilled artistic dream. Although the family was far from wealthy, Helen passed on a philosophy that would become almost a prophetic commandment for her son. Poverty is temporary, but becoming ordinary is forever. Those words became John's guiding principle, or perhaps more accurately, an obsession. He grew up with a powerful conviction that he must never become ordinary. At the age of 16, while many of his peers were still immersed in the pleasures of adolescence, John made a bold and risky decision. He left school, gathered the small amount of money he had saved, and headed alone to New York, the capital of dreams, but also a city capable of swallowing the inexperienced whole. In New York, John faced a harsh reality. He took on every kind of menial job, from manual labor to endlessly waiting for audition results that might never arrive. He lived with loneliness and scarcity, yet the flame of his mother's words continued to burn inside him. He accepted the brutality of reality in exchange for a chance, however slim, to avoid becoming an ordinary man in the eyes of the world. It was during this period that John Travolta forged his resilience, a quality that would later become the only weapon capable of carrying him through the greatest tragedies of his life. In 1976, when John Travolta was 22 years old, his life turned in a direction that no screenplay could have predicted. Following his breakthrough success as Vinnie Barbarino in Welcome Back, Kotter, John became more than a familiar face. He became a phenomenon. Yet behind the scenes, the young actor's heart found peace in a woman named Diana Hyland. Diana, the actress who was 18 years older than him, entered his life like a lighthouse amid turbulent waters. Their age difference was not a barrier. Instead, it created a unique bond. Diana was not merely a girlfriend. She was a mentor, an advisor, and the only person who truly saw the vulnerability hidden beneath the glamorous image of Hollywood's rising star. John loved her passionately, with the hopefulness of youth, believing he had finally found balance in his dazzling yet unstable world. Yet fate often seems to reserve its cruelest jokes for those who are happiest. While the world was becoming obsessed with John's dance moves in Saturday Night Fever, the film that transformed him into one of the biggest stars on the planet, a tragedy was quietly unfolding at home. Diana Hyland was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. The months that followed were a brutal emotional battle. John Travolta was forced to live as 2 different people, a superstar who smiled for cameras and danced beneath dazzling lights, and a man suffocating with grief every time he returned home. Night after night, he sat beside Diana's bed, watching the woman he loved grow weaker. He cared for her not only through medical treatment, but through the devotion of a man desperately hoping for a miracle. But the miracle never came. In March 1977, Diana passed away in John's arms. In that instant, the world of the 23-year-old actor collapsed completely. Imagine that pain. You have just become Hollywood's newest king. The world is chanting your name. Yet the one person with whom you most want to share that triumph is suddenly gone forever. John had to step back outside and continue promoting films, continue smiling, continue dancing. He performed, not just on screen, but for the entire world, convincing everyone that he was fine. Yet that was the first time John Travolta learned the harshest lesson of fame. When your heart is broken, the world does not stop and wait for you. You must learn to conceal your wounds beneath a flawless exterior. It was then that loneliness carved itself into his soul, leaving a scar that remained long after the spotlight faded, resurfacing whenever he found himself alone at night. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, John Travolta had become the very definition of a living legend. Following the extraordinary success of Grease 1978 and Urban Cowboy 1980, he was more than a star. He was a cultural phenomenon. His leather jackets, effortless dance moves, and charismatic smile became woven into every corner of American life. But in Hollywood, the peak of fame is often a beautiful trap. As the spotlight grew increasingly intense, John gradually lost his sense of direction when choosing scripts. The overconfidence of youth, combined with poor advice, led him to make decisions he would later regret for the rest of his life. He turned down the lead role in American Gigolo, the role that ultimately transformed Richard Gere into a major star. Then came An Officer and a Gentleman and Splash, golden opportunities he passed up, unintentionally handing career-defining breakthroughs to Richard Gere and Tom Hanks. The result was a succession of commercial and critical disappointments. Audiences began to lose interest, critics turned away, and Hollywood's ruthless machinery started moving against him. Suddenly, the telephone in John's apartment fell silent in a way that was both startling and deeply unsettling. By the late 1980s, John Travolta had fallen from an uncrowned king to a figure many considered forgotten. The media labeled him a relic of the past, a star whose time had supposedly passed. The people who once competed for his attention now looked the other way at industry events, and the producers who had once begged him to appear in their films no longer bothered to return his calls. It was the most brutal period of professional stagnation imaginable. From being a man whose every move was watched by the world, John found himself facing the silence of four walls and a terrifying question. Would he ever return, or had everything truly ended? He endured countless sleepless nights, staring at old posters on the wall and wondering where the line existed between a genuine artist and a fashionable commodity whose appeal had expired. It was a period that tested his perseverance more ruthlessly than any challenge fate had ever placed before someone who had once stood at the top of the world. In the early 1990s, just as John Travolta seemed to have accepted the fate of becoming a former star, living in a modern Hollywood that had moved on without him, one phone call changed everything. Quentin Tarantino, a young filmmaker known for his bold and unconventional vision, saw in John not a washed-up actor, but a forgotten treasure waiting to be rediscovered. Pulp Fiction, 1994, was not simply a film. It was a cultural event that disrupted the entire landscape of world cinema. When Tarantino handed John the script for Vincent Vega, a troubled hitman battling personal demons, many people urged him not to take the role. They believed it would be career suicide. But John, drawing on the instincts of an artist who had experienced both extraordinary success and painful disappointment, recognized it as perhaps his final opportunity. The iconic twist dance scene between John Travolta and Uma Thurman became one of the greatest comeback moments in film history. The world seemed to awaken with a collective realization: he's back. Vincent Vega was nothing like the charming young man from Grease. He was rough-edged, weary, and morally complex, qualities that John himself may well have drawn from the bitterness and hardship of his years in obscurity. This resurgence was more than a commercial success. It was a remarkable reversal of fortune. John Travolta received the second Oscar nomination of his career and transformed from a man whose phone never rang into one of Hollywood's most sought-after actors, commanding fees of $20 million per film. Yet the most important victory was not financial. Through Pulp Fiction, John proved to both the world and himself that failure is not the end. He used Hollywood's doubts as fuel to reclaim his place. It was the triumph of a man who had learned how to rise from ruins, turning emotional wounds into performances of extraordinary depth. But just as he reached the heights of success once again, fate was quietly preparing another chapter, one far more painful and devastating than anything he had faced before. If his revival through Pulp Fiction resembled a brilliant sunrise, the years that followed would bring a darkness filled with profound sorrow. John Travolta believed he had finally found lasting peace when he married actress Kelly Preston in 1991. For nearly 3 decades, Kelly was not merely his wife. She was his anchor, the companion who stood beside him through both the pressures of fame and the challenges of personal life. Yet fate seemed unwilling to stop testing him. In 2009, tragedy struck with overwhelming force. His eldest son, Jet, died suddenly at the age of 16, following a seizure while the family was on holiday in the Bahamas. Jet lived with autism and a seizure disorder, challenges that John and Kelly had quietly navigated while protecting their son from public scrutiny. The moment John held his son's lifeless body, something inside him was shattered. Jet's death left a permanent scar, a grief beyond words, creating an emptiness that could never truly be filled. And as if destiny were repeating its cruelest pattern, one heartbreak was followed by another. In 2020, Kelly Preston, the greatest love of his life and his final source of stability, passed away at the age of 57 after a private 2-year battle with breast cancer. The coincidence was almost impossible to comprehend. Both Diana Hyland, his first great love, and Kelly Preston, the woman who shared nearly 30 years of his life, were taken from him by the same devastating illness. John Travolta found himself mourning the 2 most important women in his life, while also carrying the loss of his only son, all against the backdrop of illness and mortality. At the age of 66, John was forced to confront an undeniable truth. No matter how powerful he was, no matter how much wealth he possessed, he remained powerless before the harsh realities of life and death. He was no longer a movie star on a screen. He was a widower, a grieving father, and a man trying to learn how to survive among the fragments of a life once filled with glory. Now at 70, John Travolta no longer chases the spotlight or prestigious awards. His world has become smaller and quieter, centered around his estate in Ocala, Florida, where he finds comfort alongside his 2 remaining children, Ella Blue and Benjamin. His life today is filled with peaceful mornings spent around the private aircraft he has long loved, meaningful conversations with his children, and above all, a lasting commitment to the Jet Travolta Foundation. Rather than allowing the loss of his son to consume him, John transformed that pain into action. He devotes his energy to supporting families affected by autism and seizure disorders, families whose struggles he understands deeply. In doing so, he ensures that Jet's memory lives on through acts of compassion rather than tabloid headlines. Looking back on a career spanning half a century, John no longer defines himself by the number of films he has made or by box office figures worth millions. He defines himself through resilience. He has come to understand that fame is fleeting, but the ability to rise after every fall and to continue loving after every loss is the true measure of a life. When asked about the hardships he has endured, the 70-year-old now speaks with remarkable calmness. He believes that love is always worth the pain it may eventually bring. Though life has taken from him the people he cherished most, and though it has repeatedly pushed him into darkness and obscurity, John continues to look forward. John Travolta's story is not a fairy tale about a star who always wins. It is the story of a man who learned how to live peacefully with his scars. In this final chapter, he is no longer playing any role at all. He is simply himself, a father, a survivor, and a man who has come to understand the true value of every breath once the stage lights have gone dark.